So before I get started, I want to call out the fact that I'm not trying to imply that expressing emotion is a bad thing. You know, we all know that a good cry can be cathartic once in a while. But what I am trying to show is that it's possible to keep from being consumed by something if you're open to the idea of being positive. In the spring of 2016, I had an eye exam, as I do every year, to get my contact prescription renewed. And at the time of the exam, my eye doctor said, "You know, Jennifer, for the second year in a row, you didn't do as well on one of the tests. I'd like you to see a specialist." Okay, I wasn't worried about it. I couldn't feel any symptoms of anything. So I went to the specialist, and he in turn ran more tests and took pictures of the backs of my eyes. He then said, "You know, I think something might be pushing on your optic nerve. I'd like you to have an MRI." So I did just that the Friday of Memorial Day weekend. And the very next day, I got a phone call that I never saw coming. It was a call from the specialist with the results of the MRI. And he said, "Jennifer, I'm afraid I have some bad news for you. It appears as though you have a brain tumor." My initial thought was that of disbelief, because as I mentioned, I couldn't feel any symptoms. No headaches, no motor skill problems, no cognitive inabilities, nothing. It was almost as though we were talking about a third party. So I got out a pad of paper and a pen, asked lots of questions, took copious notes. But then literally within seconds of getting off the phone, I dropped to my knees and sobbed. My mind went from 0 to 60 in a few seconds as I thought, am I going to go blind? Am I never going to get married again? Am I going to die? And after about 10 minutes or so of laying on my bedroom floor, just sobbing and having this overall visceral response, I thought, I can't let this consume me. Actually, I won't let it consume me. So I got out a pad of paper and my pen again, and I made a list of reasons why it's positive to have a brain tumor. And as you can see, it starts with, maybe I'll lose some weight, and then maybe I'll need a hot single doctor. As you can tell, it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. And then it got a little bit more serious as I wrote such things as good reminder to count blessings, good excuse to reach out to people I haven't seen in a while. And then my list got a little bit too somber for me, so I ended it with good excuse to eat dessert first. And by making this list, I wasn't in denial of my circumstance. Quite the contrary. I just wanted to have a voice in it. And that voice in turn gave me a perceived sense of control. I later learned that by having this attitude of gratitude, it can actually affect you physically. It can lower stress hormones and affect the reward center of the brain by affecting things such as dopamine, serotonin, or endorphins, your feel-good chemicals of the brain. So it was interesting how that, it didn't change my experience, but it helped me, I feel like I put a spring in my step, and it affected my perspective in a positive way. I had been diagnosed with a meningioma brain tumor, and it's called a meningioma because it's in the outer lining of the brain, which is called the meninges. And it was the size of a golf ball, so just for context. And it was squished between my optic nerve, my carotid artery, my pituitary gland, and the outer lining of my brain. So not exactly the best spot. So between that diagnosis in May and then my surgery that August, there were additional moments where I would just begin to cry, or I would feel like my life was kind of spinning out of control. So for example, when I would lay in bed at night and my eyes would begin to fill with tears, I would think to myself, okay, Jen, you can't not experience this. Figure out the how. So I would switch gears and begin to count blessings. And I would lay there and think such things as, God, thank you for supportive family and friends. And thank you for being a loving God who's also very supportive. And thank you for access to great health care. And the reason why I thought, wow, I'm so grateful for access to good health care is because a number of years earlier, my mom was in Haiti when the earthquake happened. She was there on a mission trip. And I'm happy to say that she's fine. But she went back a few weeks later to volunteer with some medical professionals. And she mentioned that these families would literally walk for miles with their kids and then push them toward the physicians and say things like, you know, could you please help my daughter? Or could you please save my son? And my mom knew that there, after a natural disaster, they could pretty much just treat the symptoms as opposed to the underlying problem. Whereas for me here, they can actually treat the underlying problem. So that's a privilege, not a right, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. So my neurosurgeon wanted me to have a number of functional MRIs. And basically with that, I was in the MRI machine for just over an hour each time. And before I had the different functional MRIs, which also included a needle of contrast in my arm, which is a dye. The dye would go up my arm, through my veins, up to my head, and then create better images for the neurosurgeon to use. I had asked a number of people ahead of time, okay, what's this going to be like? You know, what's it going to be like to be in an MRI machine for that long, or to have an IV in my arm of dye? And I'm not even exaggerating, whether I asked this of a neighbor or a colleague or a friend, I mean, anybody, everybody's reaction was negative. I mean, people were like, oh my gosh, to be in an MRI machine that long, you're going to feel buried alive, or you're going to get claustrophobic, even if you're not usually claustrophobic. And then on top of that, regarding the IV that I knew that I would have, I mean, I've passed out for decades regarding needles. I mean, I've passed out in my dentist chair just anticipating the Novocaine. It's this overactive vasovagal response, I guess. I've also passed out on my dermatologist's table having a mole removed. I mean, that's not hard, you know, but it's all, you know, a psychosomatic problem for me. So I knew that I had two things to overcome: potential claustrophobia and the needles. Well, the thing about the potential claustrophobia is I thought, again, okay, Jen, you can't not experience this, figure out the how. So each time that I got into the MRI machine, I closed my eyes and I pretended that I was back in high school in a tanning booth, because that would have been by choice. And it made me realize it's not the presence of the enclosure that's the problem, it's how you're perceiving it. So by me pretending that it was a tanning booth, I never got claustrophobic. I mean, when I was in a tanning booth back in high school, which of course back then I didn't know that it was bad for you. Now I know that. But at the time, it meant that I was either going to prom or going on vacation. It was positive. Well, I later learned that there's a term that psychologists use that's called cognitive reframing. It's where you take a situation and you can spin it and make it relevant to you and make it a positive thing, and that affects how you react to it. Well, I'm happy to say that I never once felt claustrophobic. And actually, I had another MRI 2 days ago, and again, I didn't feel claustrophobic. So, and then regarding the needle that I knew that I would have on my arm, I thought, okay, isn't this fascinating that, again, I've passed out from needles over the years, yet somehow when I was I got my ears pierced and didn't pass out, and that's 2 needles, but I wanted them pierced. So again, if you can have that sense of control, it makes a difference in your experience. I also noticed that when I thought about friends of mine when we were in college, it didn't matter where we went for spring break, there was always somebody who maybe was afraid of needles who then proceed to get a tattoo. Well, that's a needle, but they wanted the tattoo. So it's just interesting how you can play a role in how you experience things. And I was sharing this story with a colleague of mine a couple years later, and he goes, oh, Jed, I know what you're talking about. He said, I've passed out from needles for a long time as well, but the last time I had blood drawn, I was fine. And I said, well, why is that? And without missing a beat, he said, I thought the nurse was smoking hot and I wanted to impress her. So it's kind of funny how, you know, whether it's getting your ears pierced or getting a tattoo or trying to impress the nurse, you can have a role in your experience. So I also learned a very valuable life lesson, and that's that other people's perceptions might not be your experience. So for all those people who happen to tell me that I would feel claustrophobic or that I would probably pass out, you know, that's either maybe based on whatever they've experienced or things they've heard from others, but it doesn't mean that my experience had to be that way. So I learned to kind of take things with a grain of salt. Also, the night before my surgery, I had asked my mom, my dad, and my dad's wife to sit at my dining room table so I could go through my burial wishes with them and go through my healthcare directive. You know, I had been warned that the surgery the next day was going to be dangerous, you know, based on the location of the tumor. And so out of respect for my family, I wanted to go through that paperwork. And even though I knew logically that I should do that, it weighed heavily on my heart. You know, it was a very, hard conversation to have. So when it was all done, I took a shower. I thought, you know what, I've got to kind of regain my footing and kind of get my head back in the game. And so before I got in the shower, I made a list of songs on my smartphone to listen to while I was washing my hair. And it was all really upbeat music. I mean, some of it was reggae, you know, a little bit of Bob Marley, every little thing's going to be all right kind of stuff, or even some old school hip hop and different kinds of things as well. And the reason why I had the presence of mind to do this is because for years, I've noticed that at a health club, anybody who's on a treadmill or lifting weights or whatever, chances are they're wearing earbuds, listening to music. Well, that's because music can motivate you and get you in a certain frame of mind. I later learned, just like gratitude, that upbeat music can actually affect the reward center of your brain, increasing those dopamine levels. It can also lower stress hormones. But the key thing is that the music has to be relevant to you, because one person's good music is somebody else's noise. So it's very subjective. But it's also why if you go to a stadium event, like say, for example, a Vikings game or a Twins game or something, all it takes is a little bit of We Will Rock You by Queen to have thousands of people who are strangers, stomping their feet and clapping their hands and chanting in a stadium. Well, again, it's that neurochemical activity. So even though I wasn't in denial of my surgery the next day, it did kind of help me put a spring back in my step and make me feel a little bit better. My surgery would last for nearly 6 hours. After that, I spent time in a recovery room and intensive care before my own room for 8 days. And by the time my family could finally see me, they could tell that my face was swollen and bruised. My head was partially shaved, and I had 10 inches of stitches from the top of my head down to my left ear. And as they approached my bedside, they could tell that I was laying in a drug-induced slumber, so they weren't quite sure what to expect from me in terms of cognitive abilities. So with that in mind, my mom began to lightly rub my arm. And as she did so, she said, "Honey, it's Mom." And I smiled. So they knew these wheels were still turning. And rather than fear what may lie ahead, my family chose to reflect on how far I had come. We had been told that the surgery may cause a blood clot, stroke, blindness, or even death, but none of those things happened. And my family was incredibly grateful. So in this crazy picture, you can see the stitches in my head and the fact that they, start up on the top of the forehead and go down to my ear. So it's amazing what physicians can do now. And in this picture, you can tell that the stitches have been removed and the hair is starting to grow back. And this picture, to me, is a great example of perspective. I showed it to a friend of mine, and he goes, "Oh, Jen, no offense, but that picture's kind of creepy. It's making me, kind of like lightheaded." And we laughed about it. But I thought, it's interesting because what's creepy to him is beautiful to me, because the picture shows that I was healing. So in addition to gratitude, facing fears, and music, there were other things that actually could help lower my stress hormones and increase that neurochemical activity. Laughter, pets, and random acts of kindness are 3 of them. So regarding laughter, there were a lot of things that I did and different ways I tried to seek out laughter. For example, on my smartphone, I would go to Pandora and listen to comedians, as I was laying in bed trying to heal, and that's free, I would also watch comedies, or I would have friends over from high school, and we would all laugh and tell stories about each other and try to embarrass each other, and it was just, it made me forget, the fact that I had stitches in my head, and I was more worried about the fact that I had a bad perm and glasses in 8th grade or whatever they were teasing me about. But the pinnacle of the laughter experience was one day in particular, some colleagues of mine came to visit. Now, normally when I'm around colleagues downtown, I'm wearing a dress, I have on a cute pair of heels, I'm wearing jewelry, I've got makeup on, I've got my act together, best foot forward. But now these guys are coming to my condo. I couldn't wear makeup because when the surgeon cut through my head, he cut through nerves, and it hurt to put makeup on my face. So no makeup. I can't use hairspray because hairspray has alcohol in it, and that can dry your scalp and not be good for where your stitches are healing. I should also note that the surgeon was only able to get half the tumor out of my head because of the fact that the other half is too close to the carotid artery. So after this time of healing from surgery, I began radiation sessions for that remaining part of the mass, which you also shouldn't use hairspray when you're having radiation sessions on your head. Even though the tumor is not cancerous, the hope was that the radiation would kill the remaining part of the mass. So circling back to the day that my colleagues come over, and I'm not exactly looking my best, and plus this eye was swollen shut, I thought, what? I could either be super embarrassed and let this bother me, but then not have anybody come over and then feel lonely, or I could just embrace it, laugh about it, address the elephant in the room, move on, and then as an extrovert, I'll feel happy because people are over. Well, obviously, I opted for the latter. And the reason why I even had this mindset to begin with is because when I was in 3rd grade, I got glasses. And I remember I was crying and I said to my dad, I'm like, Dad, when I go to school, the kids are going to tease me. It was just, to me, it was the end of the world. And my dad said, well, if the kids laugh at you, just laugh with them, because any power they think that they have, you're going to diffuse it and then they'll move on to something else, So I learned that back when I was 8. Now fast forward to my 40s, and I use that same thought pattern. So as I opened up my door and I saw my colleagues in the hallway, and of course they were kind of taken aback, I pointed to my eye that was swollen shut and I said something to the effect of, well, if you think this is bad, you should see the other guy. And then everybody knew that it was okay to laugh about it and move on. Regarding the power of pets, you can see in this picture here, this is actually at the Minneapolis airport on the right side of the slide, that pet me sign that's green and blue. There's a woman sitting at the foot of it with her chocolate lab, and then little kids that came by to pet the dog. Traveling for work over the last 10 plus years, I've seen programs like this at airports all around the country. I mean, Denver, San Francisco, Orlando, Minneapolis, where they acknowledge the fact that pets can help lower your stress hormones. And one day in particular, when I saw this Great Dane there, literally there was a line of guys wearing these really nice suits waiting to pet the dog. And it was just so funny how people looked like really buttoned up, but then as soon as they would pet the dog, it was, you just melt right on the spot. And I know that not everybody's a pet person, but for those of us who are, there's a reason why hospitals have them for people who are lonely. And there's also a reason why the VA hospital has them for people who have PTSD. Beyond that, I've read about courthouses in Michigan, California, Montana, where volunteers bring their pets for little kids who are trying to testify on the witness stand. Oftentimes the kids will start crying and get nervous, but as soon as they have a rabbit on their lap or a dog next to them, again, those stress hormones are going down. And on top of the fact that you have the increase in your ability to feel good. So that helped me as well when I was healing. At the time I had a cat and friends would bring their dogs over, and of course all they want to do is just cuddle and offer unconditional love. So again, they can affect you physically. Regarding the power of kindness, a lot of people think that when you do something nice for somebody, that they're the only one who benefits, when really you, as the person who initiates, can benefit as well. It's called a helper's high. It's a serotonin rush, one of those neurochemicals. So that's why if you give a stranger your seat on a bus, you can feel good for doing it. And I know now, in light of COVID-19, there are times that I'll go to the grocery store and I'll say maybe to someone who's cutting the meat, or perhaps someone who's mopping the floor, thank you for doing your job. If you weren't here taking on the COVID-19 risks, I couldn't buy my meat, or we couldn't be here. And it's interesting how when you can recognize the efforts of others, it can make you feel good as well. And that happened when I was healing from surgery. People who would come by with dessert or maybe a hot dish or something, it made them feel good as well. So I learned a life lesson through this experience. So here you can see they're making my radiation mask. So initially it felt like bread dough on my face, and then it was molded to my facial structure. And now it's a hard plastic. And here you can see where I'm laying on the table. I had to wear a shirt that buttoned up the front because I couldn't pull a shirt over my head. And then with the plastic mask on my face, you can see the blue parameter around it, and that's what fastened it to the table. So I did radiation 5 days a week for 6 weeks. And, initially it was a little bit intimidating because, getting on a radiation table, knowing that the radiation wouldn't just hit my tumor, it's going to hit whatever's in its way. It hit my carotid artery and pituitary gland and all that. So initially I was nervous. But then as usual, I had to think, okay, Jen, figure it out. So I know at the halfway point, I wore a dress to the hospital and a cute pair of peep-toe heels. And I think the radiation techs were like, okay, whatever, weirdo. But in my mind, I wanted to celebrate the fact that I was halfway done, And even after my 3rd radiation session, I had texted a friend of mine, and my text read, hey, I finished my 3rd radiation session. And his response was, oh, you've got 27 left? And I'm like, no, I've got 10% done. My glass is half full. Don't tip it, So again, it's perspective. And then the interesting thing about how music helped me during the radiation sessions is that I noticed in the room with the machine, there was a docking station that I could put my smartphone in. And I asked one of the radiation techs, hey, is it okay if I make a list of music, just like I did the night before my surgery, so I could listen to songs during these 3-minute radiation sessions? And he's like, oh, yeah, go ahead, go for it. So again, it was that old school hip hop. I had a little bit of Run DMC going and some Salt and Pepper and things from a long time ago. And I did this for 2 reasons. One is I remembered how before my surgery it helped me feel good. But then beyond that, during the radiation sessions, I wanted to quiz myself on the lyrics. I thought if I can lay here with my eyes closed and quiz myself on the lyrics, it'd be a good distraction. So one day in particular, the song of the day was Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang, which came out, I think, like late 70s, early 80s. Starts out kind of disco-y, and then they're like hip hop, you don't stop, da-da-da-da-da. And the radiation tech's job was to get me situated on the table. He got my mask on my face, fastened it around my head, put a Velcro strap around my arms so that they weren't flailing off the table. And then he went over and turned on the music before going into the observation room. And in the observation room, he had a wall full of computers, a wall that was glass so he could see me through it. He had a microphone to give me directions, all that kind of fun stuff. So after he turns on Rapper's Delight and goes in the other room, before he turns on the radiation, over the microphone and over the music, he says, and today we have a little radiation for the ladies. It was super funny. So it was like laughter, a random act of kindness, music, these things that only made me feel better as I'm laying on the table about to have radiation put in my head, but they helped him as a caregiver feel good as well. I mean, imagine having a job where you're putting people in a radiation machine all the time and people don't want to be there. I mean, this made him feel good as well. So music played a huge role in the overall experience. So after all this was done, I wondered, am I kind of unique in my experience, or would this type of thing even help children? Well, as part of the research that I did, I found out that there's a children's hospital in Pittsburgh that had the same mindset a number of years ago. They created what they called their adventure series. And basically they have theme rooms for these ominous machines. So it could be an MRI or a PET scan or a CAT scan, anything where a little kid's gonna cry and squirm in the machine because it's creepy. So what they did, as you can see on the left side of the slide here, they decorated the machines. So this top one is supposed to be a submarine. The bottom one is a pirate ship. In addition to decorating the machines, they put decals on the floor, they put murals on the walls. Even the staff are in on the whole themes. So for example, regarding the pirate ship, the staff person might say to a little kid, now make sure you lie really still and don't cry because you don't want the pirate to know where the treasure is. And then the little kids are like, okay. Well, between 2005 and 2007, they lowered their sedation rates by 99%. Now that, of course, helps the underlying patient. It also helps the caregiver. I mean, if you're the staff person who's working with them, or perhaps the parent who brings them to the hospital, it helps them as well and put them at ease. Beyond that, it helps the overall hospital in terms of liability because you're not sedating as many kids. So it's pretty interesting how this whole idea of cognitive reframing, again, for me, it was the tanning booth. For them, it's a pirate ship, can make a huge difference. Also, I would love for hospitals to encourage people, bring your smartphone like I did. You perhaps have a docking station for people. Maybe music's not your thing. Maybe people would want to have a white noise app. With a white noise app, you could listen to waves while you're in an MRI or a radiation machine, or you could listen to crickets, pretend you're camping. It's interesting how God designed us so that we can take our mind and go elsewhere and almost forget, where you are. So 6 months after my surgery, I had to have another MRI. And this is because the neurosurgeon wanted to see if there was any soft tissue damage from the surgery or perhaps any kind of damage from the radiation sessions. I did some lab work as well. And when I'm laying in the MRI machine this time, my eyes began to fill with tears because I thought, what am I going to find out today? I thought, what if that radiation that came in or the fact that they had a saw on my head, did some extra damage that we didn't anticipate. So rather than be consumed by those feelings of doubt, I began to pray for other people. And as I laid there and thought, God, please help Grandma not feel lonely. Please protect Mom on her mission trips. Please protect my dad and his wife as they travel. It took the focus off of me and made me feel good for wanting what's best for them. And again, I got that helper sign, and before I knew it, the test was done. So praying for others while you're having kind of an ominous experience yourself can help you as well. Also, on the 1-year anniversary of my surgery, I took the day off of work. I wanted to reclaim the day as a day of gratitude. And during that 6-hour window that I would have been in surgery the year before, I took that time to write out thank you cards. And I wrote one to my surgeon, one to my mom, one to my dad and his wife, one to a friend of mine and her husband who referred me to the surgeon. And with each of the thank you cards, I had 2 pictures. One was a picture of me a year earlier with the stitches in my head, and one was of me like the day before. Kind of, here's where I was, here's where I am. Thank you for being a part of my experience. And again, those feelings of gratitude can just change your perspective on things. There's a term that psychologists use that's called neuroplasticity. I just learned about it a while ago. And basically it's where you can help rewire your brain. And of course, I'm not Pollyanna. Sometimes there are things in life that are really, really heavy. But in terms of a general mindset that can make things more positive, initially it takes some effort, trying to be positive. But after a while, those initial efforts become more of a habit. And that habit then becomes a mindset. And I know an example of this was one time I was in an elevator downtown, and this stranger walked up to me, and he goes, "Oh, it's supposed to rain today." And I said, "Well, the grass will be green." And he goes, "Well, yeah, but then we have to mow it." And I said, "Well, that's good exercise." And he looked at me, and he goes, "I'm not going to win this conversation, am I?" And I went, "Nope." And then I got out of the elevator. But it just kind of becomes a habit. If you initially challenge yourself, it can make a big difference in how you view life. Okay, well, I have a quote to end things here. It's from Helen Keller. She said, "The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision." So my hope for today is that I could help you visualize what life can be like with the power of positive thinking. Thank you.